Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for July of 2025. I've got 11 releases that I'm going to be talking about in this video with time codes listed in the description for each individual review if you want to skip around in the video. We're doing a webcam style because my phone is broken and I usually use it for like notes and the like when I'm filming these. So I'm going to have them on my computer. We're still going to have the album art up in here. I got Tyler back here like it's in the backdrop because that's actually a new album that I'll be talking about this month that I already have a physical copy of. A lot of good stuff dropping in July. Very dense month for hip-hop, but give it a like if you're excited. And let's go ahead and dive on in by talking about...
On a mountain and I turned to dust. Little green worm said it wasn't enough, so it turned me back.
Even if they've been dropping stuff since 2018, Viagra Boys were not a band that were really on my radar. And when I was looking into them and saw that they were this like Swedish post-punk band with an album cover like this, I wasn't sure if they were gonna, like, land on the side of the Hives with, like, a more tongue-in-cheek edge, or if they were gonna get more straightforward and sincere. I knew there was gonna be at least a little bit of lol irony to it, considering this is the album cover, but I honestly really love the sort of balance they strike in really poking fun at general big corporations and other, like, pop culture trendy things, while also striking to a more core of attacking getting swept up in the monotony in a really honest way that I love the sort of pairing of. You know, yeah, it's really overt out the gate with like the Man Made of Meat opener being this song that kind of has this air of cattiness to some of its lyrics, you know. The vocalist kind of sounds almost like Les Claypool-ish, with lines sort of referencing Matthew Perry's passing and the like, while the Bog Body gets a little more overt with its bass-driven aggression at sort of yelling at those that are obsessed with, like, negative body image and stuff like that. I like that it gets even more direct on tracks like Pyramid of Health, while having this almost, like, mid-90s Butthole Surfers mellowing of their sound that sort of leans into like almost a slacker rock edge that I honestly don't think happens enough in music in general anymore as somebody who likes parts of that sound. It almost feels like they're getting to the heart of what was missing in some components of newer records from bands like Man Man that I like seeing sort of adapted in their own sort of way. There's a stretch of the record where I feel like that sort of pairing also blends together well on a Waterboy through You Need Me, where we see somebody swept up in the day-to-day, you know, being stuck in their body, so to speak, before this meltdown within store policy gives way to this darker underside of You Need Me. This is a really fun listen that has an other side to it that I think it makes it all the more captivating. I absolutely love this. I'm glad I have more things to listen to for this band after leaving this in the rear view, and I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. I think if you want some music that's both fun and poignant in some of its messaging, this is a good example of that.
Black Wall Street, shit gets deep. Middle school, my peers know I'm for sure the man.
You know what's funny, seeing Lil Wayne pop up on this new Tech 9 album, 5816 Forest, because both his newest album and this album see the artist in question getting reflective on at least a time in their life. For Wayne, it's a handful of eras of his life, so to speak, but this new Tech 9 album sees him like throwing it way back to the pre-Strange Music days, to the pre-real being in the hip-hop industry days, which I think is a really refreshing take for Tech to tackle on a project. I kind of like seeing him wanting to conceptualize this real throwback. I also just think that it's like, in a similar breath, when he does reference stuff that I'm aware of from Tech's past, it's all stuff that I've heard him like talk about to death in a way that like I just don't think adds a whole lot to his proverbial discography. You know, it's interesting to hear him talk about the real sort of change in spirit that came when his mom like married his stepdad on Friday to Sunday, where he talked about like the change in perspective having a Muslim stepdad in a Christian household that he grew up in. You know, it was interesting sort of hearing him talk about his real early come-ups, like on tracks like Lola and Black Wall Street. But it was also like wild to see him just go the distance and really talk about the debaucherous side of his teenage years, like on The Nice One, where he talks about an incident where like he hooked up with this white girl who had a racist dad, who then came to school the next day to like find him and try to like pin a robbery that happened in his house during that incident on him. It was also like wild to see, like, before talking about like his punishment from that and having like a song about being grounded, like to hear Tech Nine rap about being grounded as a teenager is a wild thing. But then also have like a couple songs where he talks about other women that he was like with in different parts of his teenage years, like on What Did I Do or on No Rub. It goes like a bit too far. And then to frame it around like him telling his kids these stories, I just think that they're kind of weird brushstrokes that are added to this painting. They didn't necessarily need to be there. You know, for as much as I like hearing him talk about the problems he had working at Fish Captain, because again, it's interesting just to get that kind of perspective, I don't also need to have a song where he raps about like his lucky J's. There's a lot of different things on this project that work and don't. And while I'm on the side of like a lot of it not working, it's mostly because like I think the instrumental palette is the worst kind of like idiosyncrasy in Tech's catalog. A lot of the beat selection on here doesn't do a lot for me. I honestly think it would have been more interesting for him to like dip more into his pre-Strange Music influence, like have more like an old school West Coast influence to the sonic palette is. I thought it would have been much more interesting, you know, especially when you're having songs like RDV where you're talking about your Rogue Dog Villains era, or hell, you could have just straight up gotten rid of Sacrifice, because that is like on par with the Jelly Roll song from the new Wayne album as just like a lane of rap that I don't need to see more of. I just hate the sonic palette of that song, hate the production, hate Jerry Robinson's hook. I really fucking hate that song. This isn't the worst Tech Nine album, but it's probably the least interesting one, which is kind of sad considering like I thought that this would have been a really cool thing to tackle, but I also didn't need to hear a song where like he reenacts his actual birth. I'm giving this a 4. I don't really like it. Again, it's not my least favorite album I've spun in Tech's catalog, but it's also not like my favorite by any stretch of the imagination. I thought about giving it a 5, but like the more that I sit with it, the more that I think about it, the more that it just like, I don't think there's enough good putting this in like a mediocre realm. Just because it's also just a bit overwrought. Some of the theming just falls in this weird realms, and I'd rather not spin this album again. I'm obsessive, my heart's racing, Freedom and Liberation were the themes and emotions that Kesha had in her live show when I saw her last month. They are also the themes of this new album, Period, that dropped in the beginning of last month that I've been spinning. And I gotta say, it's a really solid showcasing of those freedoms and a really good unifying of those themes across a track listing that, yeah, has its realms of comfort, but decides to branch off in some really interesting ways. I really enjoy Kesha's mood on this, you know, especially after a very emotionally intense record like Gag Order. It's nice to see her just really wanting to be herself and trying to find herself again, so to speak, amidst that post-trauma come down, so to speak. You know, freedom is the moniker, it's the mission statement, it's what kicks this album off with this like almost 6.5 minute funk-led jam that I honestly think starts the record off on a really strong foot, but doesn't necessarily paint the picture of what the, like, sonic pacing of this album is going to be. Because, like, nothing else reaches that kind of zenith. And it's kind of unfortunate, because I love the journey that song sort of takes you on. It's a good sort of harnessing of energy and keeping the listener engaged amidst that track list, amidst that runtime. But, like, that's not necessarily a huge knock to the album. I would love to have seen more of it. But, like, what's here is still really fun, you know? She gets to the nitty-gritty out the gate after that, you know, with, like, Joyride, Yippee-Ki-Yay, and Delusional being this, like, three-peat of singles that are wrapped up in the debaucherous ideas that this album has going on, especially with Joyride, a song that I really loved when it dropped. I think that, like, more pop stars need to embrace accordion in their pop jams. because I think that that's a really good, also still sexy song that, like, I don't know. Yippee-ki-yay, I like a little less than Joyride and Delusional as far as the singles go. I get what she's going for. She's trying to, like, recapture Timber's energy to a degree, or some of the songs like that in her catalog. I've never really been a fan of, like, those times Kesha's dipped into those sounds as much as others. But, like, I get why it's here. And you could do worse with a pop song like it. Delusional, though, songs like It and The One take me back to, like, 2011. They've got that same kind of, like, euphoric rush that, like, Kesha really did in her early catalog, just in, like, a very modern sense, and it has, like, a production that has, like, a bridging of those ideas with, like, a modern twist, and I think Stick the Landing really well. Whereas tracks like Red Flag and Boy Crazy see her really dipping into more modern pop tangents, some, like, hyper-pop inspired stuff that I think she also tackles pretty amicably. I honestly... Rachel loves Boy Crazy. It's like her favorite song in the album. And I think that it's a really nice, just like straightforward, kinetic little jam. You know, I think that like those moments do a good job to weave the past and the present, so to speak, amidst the ones or your other funk-led jams like Love Forever. I also like that the album really has a good, like, ebb and flow with its energy before winding down with another really big moment like Cathedral. It's a well-paced record, I'll give it that, too. You know, for, like, her first really big independent splash, I'm happy to see Kesha creatively and artistically make a record like this, because it is a really solid listen, even if I don't necessarily like it as much as her last album. I do still think that, like, I like it more than some of the other stuff from the other records of hers that I've liked in this resurgence of Kesha. It's a record that I really like. I'm giving it a 7. I think it's really solid. I think there's a handful of jams I'll keep in my rotation, so to speak. But this is a case of a record that, like, left me wanting more because it gave me more in other pockets that it didn't necessarily live up to throughout the rest of the runtime. But that's not to knock it tremendously. Just my 2 cents, so to speak.
Inglorious, victorious, wide body B.I.G. like notorious. Tell me as we trafficking.
I, like many, were highly anticipating this Clipse album. I was shocked when Push and Malice first got back together on that Kanye record. I didn't think Malice was really ever gonna grab a mic again. But I'm glad that a handful of years after that, we finally have a new Clipse album, fully produced by Pharrell. It's like fucking 2006 never stopped, baby. I know that they did stuff after Hell Hath before they sort of split off, but like, damn, this album is like the kind of electrifying chemistry that like you love to see across the board on a record experience. One record that this very much reminded me of throughout spinning it was the last Tribe album to drop. You know, it very much invoked the spirit of like embracing legacy while also showing where you've been since you last left your listeners. And I think that, like, while there's, like, Coke bars throughout this thing that just got me every single time, both Push and Malice just have so many bars. Push in the Blizzard and Honda Civics, House of Gucci selling Lady Gaga bars. Like, there's bars all over this thing about slinging Coke that just still hit. But, like, the evolution of that, especially in the case of Malice, where he talks a lot about, like, his perspective being removed from hip-hop, like on All Things Considered, or throughout parts of, you know, Mike Tyson Blow to the Face and all that, I think really are what elevate this, along with Pusha sort of getting reflected in his own senses, while also just getting nitty-gritty with it, and doing the subtle things that Pusha does, like on his verse on Chains and Whips, or on POV. You know, the opener, Birds Don't Sing, being this very emotional entry point, really sets a stage of, like, rekindling, reflection, and embracing your past in a strong way. And I think that, like, while it is, like, an emotional high that, like, doesn't necessarily feel like the spirit of a lot of the record in its subject matter, the mood is there. And, like, I love that, like, they carry that mood throughout a lot of the highs they want to celebrate on here. You know, the beat selection is also just fantastic. Pharrell really wasted nothing for these guys. You know, he knew some old friends were wanting to hit him up again, and he gave them what they asked for. But, like, The features, too. Kendrick on Chains of Whips is insane. Tyler on POV is wild as hell. It was cool seeing Ab Leva again on Inglourious Bastards. Low-key one of my favorite songs on the whole project. I also liked, while I've seen people talk about, like, Stove God Cook should have had a verse with them, his hook on FICO, I think, honestly cements and grounds the song in a way that is, like, different than some of the fantasticalism and luxury spun throughout some of the hooks throughout this project, like on Ace Trumpets or All Things Considered. You know, there's a lot of rounding out that happens on this project that I think really helps give it this full-fledged, well-thought-out sort of spin. You know, there's a lot to this project that I think really excels, and I think that, like, as far as bouncing back with a lot of strength, showcasing one's pen game, not losing any luster, especially in the case of Malice, this shit is it, man. You know, I think that it's easily going to stand as, like, one of the most celebrated hip-hop records of the year, and it absolutely deserves that. You know, I saw Anthony gave it a 10. I wouldn't be, you know, too far off in saying it's like a 9 or a 10 as well. I think this album is absolutely fantastic. I think that it's got a lot of moments that, like, I keep coming back to and finding different appreciation for, whether it be a beat switch or just a part of the production that very much gets me every time. There's a lot that just gives life and energy when spinning this that I just can't stop getting wrapped up in.
Red hard, even when I'm by myself. I'm dead far away when I'm by myself. I tell lies.
Don't Tap the Glass isn't the only album from this month that I've gotten. The other one I've gotten just isn't here yet, but I ordered a copy of Neighborhood Gods Unlimited, the new Open Mike Eagle album, because it is a really good coalescence of his road he's been pillaging for, honestly, more than just this decade so far, but honestly there's parts of it that sort of transcend to some of his roots and where he sort of, like, broke through in attitude and mood with his sort of style of writing that I think meets the worlds of the sort of, like, bleak deconstructions of nostalgia and, like, I don't even say, like, crumbling late stage capitalism, but kind of, and blends them into this cocktail that I think is a really well thought out album that has so many moments that reaffirm why, like, while there are other rappers tapping into sort of, like, similar ideas or, like, that really sit in a similar lane to Mike, the way he does it just sets him apart in such a substantial way. You know, there's an air of I don't want to say sarcasm, but sort of sarcasm beneath parts of tracks like Woke Up Knowing Everything opening theme, where he's seemingly writing from the perspective of both somebody who has been bestowed all of the universe's knowledge overnight and someone who's known him for a very long time and knew him when he was lesser smart, reacting to that event, that I think is hilarious, but also, like, gives this interesting tone to start the project that I think comes back around on tracks like My Coworker Clark Kent's Secret Black Box, where he's rapping from the perspective of, like, an employee of the Daily Planet who knows Superman is Clark Kent and wants so badly to let that secret out, but just doesn't. Almost in sort of a way, like, insulting the people around him, like, how do you not see this? And I absolutely love the mood of that song. It's hilarious. It's so good. I'm glad he made it a single, too, because it's easily one of, like, if we're talking singles, it's one of the best of the year so far, if only for sheer concept, execution, and how hilarious it is. But that same sort of mood, you know, helps transcend the irony that could be seen on a track like Okay, But I'm the Phone Screen, where it's sort of feels like on the surface he's just writing a song reflecting on a time that he broke his phone screen, something that hits pretty close to home to me recently, but, like, takes it a step farther in the back half of the song that I think gets to the heart of where I think this album goes deeper in sort of like an observance of ties to things like that in a way that may not always be the best. Something that almost sort of feels like the awakening from the night terror on Wide Leg Michael Jordan Generation X jeans. A song that feels like a sort of parody or sort of like a twist, maybe even, on a song that I just knocked earlier in this video. the Nike J's Tech 9 song, but like especially after coming off of the heels of a dream of the Midnight Baby, not a euphemism, also kind of feels like just like a come down from that and like a really emotionally tense moment that the album gets to that is a good sort of like showcasing of what also just works with this album in a sequencing sort of way. And that sort of gets even more earnest as the album closes out after that with Sorry I Got Huge and Unlimited Skull Voices, where it feels like he's sort of coming full circle on some of the mood from an album like Anime Trauma and Divorce, which I think is another cool sort of like component of this. And again, this just kind of feels like the mind box puzzle that encompasses Open Mike Eagle's creative journey, and I think creates a really cool listening experience on top of being this sort of like showcasing of growth, so to speak. I love this though. I'm giving it a 9. Easily one of the best rap albums I've heard all year. Another fantastic notch in a genre that's just had a lot of heat coming out of it recently.
I'm that guy trying to get my paper, baby. I'm that guy.
Did I buy or pre-order a copy of Don't Tap the Glass out of sheer FOMO for not having Chromacopia, given how much I love that album and was still riding that Chromacopia high when he surprise announced this the night after the Kesha concert that I went to? Sure. But like, do I regret my purchase? Absolutely not. Really, I think Don't Tap the Glass is the sort of like letting out the energy that I could understand. Considering he's touring like a very emotionally dense record like Chromacopia, to have this desire to just have more catchy, high energy positivity to get away from that, this just feels like the ultimate antidote to that sort of life. And like, I think that it is a great showcasing of Tyler's propensity to write a catchy, very pop forward song. You know, yeah, this album is like dance club inspired out the ass, and a lot of people have been praising the fuck out of that. I love the aggression that's on Big Poe and Stop Playing With Me as much as the more emotional side of things, like the absolute bops Sugar on My Tongue and Ring Ring Ring, or the title track Don't Tap the Glass, which is just this filthy coin of high energy and low-key swagger. I think that the more sort of like self-realization that's felt as the record does close its door throughout I'll Take Care of You and Tell Me What It Is, where we see Tyler back where, you know, he started the project on the heels of this just emotional weight, I think brings the listener back in a really nice way. I think this album is incredibly good. I think that like if you haven't spun Don't Tap the Glass and you want some really good high energy rap music, look no farther. I think that like the outright just disco energy on a track like Ring 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 doesn't feel too off base considering some of the sample choices and stuff he's done in the past, but like there was a genuine surprise. And I think to have that on the same record as a track like Mom and M or Sucker Free, which are more hip-hop inspired both in a modern and old school West Coast sense respectively, just shows what even in such a small fashion Tyler can do to showcase how well he can unify some, you know, maybe not necessarily cohesive inspirations on the surface. When I saw an interview and he talked about sampling Cherry Bomb on the drum portion of I'll Take Care of You, this album made even more sense to me, honestly. This is a record that like feels like Tyler's been wanting to make for like years, but never really quite got nailed down. You know, and I feel like that's a big reason why he loves to bring up Cherry Bomb, because it's a record where it does feel like it's carrying the same energy as this. This album does not necessarily have the victory lap sort of feel that Cherry Bomb does, but does try to like bask in one's own highs. You know, Tyler, from a business perspective, is doing better than ever. Sort of like to have this tour where he's like trying to dwell on that sadness, like, no, this feels like the time where he should be, you know, making records about shaking his ass and living the high life. And I think that this does a good job at presenting that. My only complaint, and it is something that is affecting the score of it, is its length. I like a good pocket project, don't get me wrong. I've really loved, you know, a lot of records that have been cropping up for the last couple of years so much that I dropped my own pocket project. But like, I think it's just because I love the energy on this that I want so much more of this. Like, I feel like he could have easily done the like deluxe route with this, or just like made something like just full stop, high energy for a full release, and even go a little more emotionally deeper with that if he wanted to, considering he teases that prospect. I don't know. I do love this album. Is it gonna be like at the very top of my favorites of the year? Probably not. Will it be like amongst probably even the video portion though? Absolutely. This album is as addictive as other records I spun last year in this world, but just for a completely different reason. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. Could be a 9 if I gave it time, but as like right now, I think it's a great 8 out of 10 record that still just does leave me wanting a lot more.
Bentley bicycles, 10 pistols, a slick bid. Bally wearer with some H. Winstons on Panamera, black hood.
One album I was going to talk about this month, but decided to scrap because, admittedly, I like this album more than it was the Wu-Tang and Mathematics, Samson the Bastard Swordsman album soundtrack thing. I'll talk about it at some point this year. I probably won't talk about it in August because August has a lot of releases dropping. But this new Raekwon album I also wanted to talk about because it sort of fits like a sort of weird thing that happened 3 times in July. And that's just like, it's been a coke rap summer between the Clipse and the Freddie Gibbs album that I'll talk about later on in the video. But like, Raekwon just sort of picked a really good time to drop his newest album. It's a record that sees him sort of doing a better job at bringing his brand of like mafioso inspired coke rap to the youths and newer generations than his last album, The Wild, which I think was like a solid album, but even in hindsight I don't spin it nearly as much as even of any of his records and his discography. I think it's mostly just because he's working with a team that's known how to get him out there in a good sort of way. You know, the instrumental palette helps suit that coke rap as much as it does the elegant side of the mafioso side of things. You know, he's got these tracks where he's throwing it back in a major way, like the collaboration with Inspector Deck and Carlton Fisk, Pomegranate, or the Ghostface Raekwon track 600 School, where he talks about a deal gone south. He's got a posse cut with the Griselda guys on Wild Coercions that I think is a well done track. I think all 3 of them just chop it up well. The production on that and a lot of this record honestly kind of reminds me of that Benny the Butcher album from a couple of years ago, his like Rock Nation debut, and I think that it suits Raekwon's vibe as much as it did his. It does do something better than other Raekwon solo albums and other Wu-Tang solo albums fail to consistently accomplish, and that's being like stylistically that individual artist and find a way to be very separate from those Wu-Tang roots. Raekwon and Method Man have both struggled with it throughout pockets of the career. So has Ghostface. But Ghostface, I would say, because he's such like a out there dude sometimes, he has stuck the landing on it. But I like that this album also does so. And there are some moments that sort of set it apart in ways that don't necessarily falter, but aren't amongst my favorite in this sort of tangents Raekwon has done on his records, like on One Life. I'm into this song that sort of talks about the importance of life, especially when you're doing these songs like this, and I think that there are good ones in this lane, and that one isn't necessarily like the worst I've heard, but I feel like there's a stark contrast to like Ray's tone and Stacey Barth's well done hook that I think creates like a too harsh of a juxtaposition for me. And that's not to say that he can't do sort of softer beats or softer sonic palettes, because like Get Out of Here, one of the tracks with Ghostface, mellows on the energy comparatively to like 600 School and doesn't quite get into the elegance of Mac and Lobster, but finds a realm all its own similar to One Life that I think it rides a little smoother than that jam. I also don't necessarily hate the collab with Nas, the Omerta, but I think it is a wild tangent for this album to take sort of thematically and sonically that may tie into like the title and such, but I don't think he's necessarily like throughout the record going as hard on like the Emperor's New Clothes ass vibe as some of Nas's bars on that collaboration. But I will say that like I've heard Raekwon do far less consistently on a record. I think this is honestly a really solid batch of tracks, and there's a handful of cuts and collabs that I'm glad to see him pull together and come to light, and also just see him work with some artists just as solidly as he's done in the past still at this point in his career. I'm giving this a 7. It is a really solid record that I think if you've liked Raekwon stuff in the past, you could find a decent amount of stuff here to scratch your itch, so to speak. You know, sometimes there does come a point where you commit to the bit so much that you end up falling in love with it. That feels like the sort of emotion driven behind Wet Leg's sophomore outing, Moisturizer, where they seemingly try to cut through the mustard of the deadpan irony that permeated throughout their debut and strike a more emotional core. I will say, I do think that they do it successfully. However, one thing that I think is missing are some moments that I think made Wet Leg something a little special on that debut. There are a lot of songs that I think get caught up in this same sort of emotion, like a song like Shea Lounge, but they aren't necessarily delivered with the same kind of energy, and that doesn't necessarily make it worse, but it makes it different in a way that makes me miss that still on the other side. I do want to say, though, that, like, especially considering how this album opens up, that feels like the point, though. Like, the opener CPR feels like the murdering of the bit for it to be reborn on Liquid Eyes to True Love. Something that immediately gets turned into some sort of, like, cattiness on Catch These Fists, but I think still translates really well. I love the sonic palette that carries this record, which sort of like sends those ideas over the edge, so to speak. The sort of rush that hits throughout the chorus of Catch These Fists just hits so much harder than anything on that debut that even if I miss some of that sort of like mood I was talking about, it doesn't matter because I'm swept up in the emotions here. And even in that breath, tracks like Jennifer's Body do feel like they're trying to sort of like reinvent those ideas a little more directly. They still just evolve to something else so well. Same goes for like the bass-led tracks like Pillow Talk. They do feel like they're trying to evolve that mood, but I just love where they take it and how different it still feels. You know, there's like an unsettling ease that sort of feels like the aftermath of the death of the irony, so to speak, if we're carrying the sort of emotions that I was alluding to at the beginning of this review. I do really like this album, and I think one of the things that'll keep me coming back to it more than that debut is honestly that emotional core, which is why I do think it is ultimately a little bit stronger at the end of the day. I think there's a little more that sits with the listener, so to speak, that I think it just makes for a stronger listening experience. I'm gonna give this an 8 out of 10, which is what I gave their debut, but I have bumped their debut down to a 7, and I don't know if the same will happen to Moisturizer.
It's a lot of cold tears, hard times in this bitch. Murder can't stay off my mind in this bitch. Ain't no love, she don't.
Between the Clipse, Raekwon, and this Freddie Gibbs Alchemist album, Coke Rap has just been thriving this summer. An album that when it was announced, I was immediately already hyped for because I think the first Alfredo is absolutely a career high for Freddie, who I think is a solid rapper by and large. I've really enjoyed all of the projects that I've talked about on the channel for the most part, and I think that this is an apt sequel to the first Alfredo, if only because, like, Freddie and the Alchemist have this incredible chemistry, and his voice just works, just suits the instrumental palette and, like, the sample choices that the Alchemist just works with so harmoniously. You know, some of the ideas on here out the gate just are fucking awesome. On the opener 1995, when this guitar solo comes in and Freddie just starts chopping it up on it, it just sounds unreal, and I absolutely think it gets the record off on this electrifying foot amidst its mellow atmosphere. Then I think Freddie uses to immediately get into some nitty-gritty, just aggressive shit on Mar-a-Lago and Lemon Pepper Steppers with grace. He slides over those beats, and once the energy really ramps up a bit on Lemon Pepper Steppers, it just feels like he's smoothly putting the pedal to the metal. All the collaborations, for as few as there are, all fucking knock it out of the park. I think that Anderson's hook on Ensalada is just butter. I think that that's honestly a trio that should work more together as a whole, because I think Anderson can be a really good storyteller, and I think could provide a good juxtaposition to Freddie. But I also think that, like, Larry June's style, especially considering he worked with The Alchemist earlier this year, just feels like him hopping in on the side quest in a really graceful fashion. I think that Feeling is a really good song on the album. I also think he provides a really good juxtaposition to Freddie's rapid fire flow that he has in a lot of the song. But on the adverse of that, I think that JID on Gold is just a brilliant showcasing of two fiery rappers locking the fuck in. Like, both just dance on this twinkly beat with absolute grace and majesty. I also love how there's, like, stretches of the record where we feel like we're dipping back into Freddie's POV on a late night. Like, there's some flexing that goes on, and I Still Love Her, that I feel like comes back to bite him in the ass on Gas Station Sushi with its paranoid edge. They might not actually be the case, but, like, that impaired, but, like, the atmosphere on both tracks sort of has some similar sample choices that feel like we're getting brought back into the fray with those two tracks relating to each other. I really love this album, though. I think everyone wants some lean, hard-hitting tracks that both lay it out direct and get a little braggadocious with it. Look no farther than this. Easily another highlight in a month that had a lot of really good shit going on for hip-hop. It's an 8 out of 10 record. This thing absolutely smashes.
But still Papa Dre. Like the grandpa of Adonis. All these toxins, I need a cologne.
My introduction to Bruiser Wolf's brand of album construction came in his album last year, My Stories Got Stories, where I got a good real sense of Bruiser's sort of vibe he's coming with, if that makes sense. And I think that Potluck does nothing more but reaffirm those sort of observations I made on My Stories Got Stories. He's got a really cyclical songwriting style that sort of has these almost mantras driven into the listener to sort of bring the themes of a song to the forefront. And it's very just matter of fact. But he carries all of that with this charisma and swagger that adds a bit of brevity to the sincere weight that some of these songs tackle subject-wise, that I think makes for a really fun spin and a really engaging experience. You know, he's got tracks like Say No More and Beat the Charge, or hell, Right or Wrong especially, where it just goes hard on that mantra, while having these other songs like Trust Issues or Air Fryer, which Air Fryer also leans into the former, or Pee Wee Herman, where he still got that brevity, but he loses some of that mantra to sort of really let the sincerity hit harder home. Like Trust Issues, he really goes in on the problems he has with the people that have done him wrong and how it's really had a lasting effect on him. But he has this like crooner style to the hook that just, again, gives it a different flavor. Air Fryer, he's just got another cooking bricks in an air fryer type bar where he's keeping that coke rap still in the minds of the listener, but it just feels like another chapter in these street sagas that he's writing on here. Pee Wee Herman I use as an example just because it's got fucking tequila spin in its beat on a track called Pee Wee Herman, which is this like posse cut, and it just feels like the type of song made where you're just getting all your friends together in the house and just chopping it up and having fun. There's a real sense of fun juxtaposed with that sincerity that I think was prevalent on parts of My Stories Got Stories, but feels much more the mission statement. And I don't necessarily think that it's worse or for that, but I don't think that I like this as much as his last album. I also don't think that there's as many features on here that I think hit as hard as the ones on that last one. But I still really like this album. It's been in my rotation a lot looser than stuff I would normally keep in my rotation to talk about in a following month. And I think it's also in sort of like enhanced my feelings on, I just don't really like this as much as My Stories Got Stories. But I do really enjoy Bruiser's personality. I think his slice of life style of writing is also just really good. He has these metaphors that just, in these punchlines, that just consistently hit and at least get a little bit of a chuckle out of me. His production choices on here also really feel like are indebted to either enriching the vibe or just sort of like making those punchlines hit harder. It's like a good juxtaposition of some elegance with those punchlines too, that I think creates an even further fun listening experience. I think that if you like Bruiser Wolf, or you like personality forward hip hop that doesn't necessarily go big on themes but goes big on the presentation, you'll dig parts of this for sure. If you haven't listened to Bruiser Wolf, I think this is a better example of maybe what could be the sort of MO he typically runs with on a project, and I'm ultimately walking away giving this like a 7 out of 10. It is a really solid album, especially in a month where I've been spinning some insanely dense in thematics and mood hip-hop records. This is still a really solid one, but it is one that I found myself spinning even less and less as July continued, so I figured I would put it here before keeping the selections I like in my rotation and casting the rest into the sunset, so to speak. And that's what I spun over the last month. Do you agree with my thoughts? Do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, along with any albums you've spun from this year that I haven't talked about that you'd like for me to talk about on this segment. Once again, thank you so very much for watching this. I'm gonna go. I've been Viagra. You guys will get these lots of situations, and I'll see you another day. Also, like and subscribe and all that. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. See ya!
For me.